Mr. A.R. Shaw, welcome to your first one-on-one with Hype Plus. Man, thanks for coming.
Man, I'm glad to be here, man.
Let's get the people familiar with who you are. What is your current working title and what are you currently doing today?
All right, so today, right now, I am I'm an author of the book Trap History, which is the first book on the history of trap music. I'm also the executive editor of the Atlanta Daily World, which is the first Black-owned daily publication in America. So those are my working titles.
Man, so trap music is gonna be the focal point of this conversation, and then we'll see how this goes. Where are you originally from, like that made you think about doing a book on trap music?
So, born and raised in Atlanta, Grady baby.
Okay.
Raised primarily in Oakland City, which is like not too far from West End, which is of course synonymous with the AUC, Morehouse, Spelman, Clark. But yeah, grew up in the West End, Oakland City, and I was a journalist. That's pretty much what I do. By trade, I'm a journalist, and so during my careers as a journalist, I've been able to pretty much interview every major artist that came from Atlanta, whether it's Outkast, whether it was T.I., Gucci, Jeezy, Migos, Young Thug, Gunna. Interview pretty much every artist you could think of from Atlanta. And traveling as a journalist, I saw that Atlanta's culture was pretty much, being appreciated, not just in America, but globally. In London, they were bumping trap music, and I covered the Olympics in London in 2012,
Wow.
and they were talking about trap music. I was like, man, like, I wanted the people in Atlanta, like, do my homeboys back in West End know that trap music is big in London? Like, do people from Atlanta really know that trap music is global? And I did my research, and I'm like, no one has really documented this culture. No one has really documented the rise of trap music. And it's a subgenre of rap that's been around for over 2 decades. And I'm like, no one has really like captured this moment, captured the history. And so I started writing. I said, 2014, I'm like, I'm just gonna go full-fledged and capturing the history and the culture of trap music, just so we can, document our history. That's something important for me.
For those that don't know, what is a Grady baby?
A Grady baby is Grady Hospital is the biggest hospital in Atlanta. Is right downtown Atlanta, and that's something that for people from Atlanta, if we say Grady baby, that means that you're really from Atlanta. Like you're like bred from this city, and it's some famous Grady babies. I think Kanye West is a Grady baby. I actually think Spike Lee is a Grady baby as well. I think he was down here, and he was raised in Brooklyn, but I think he actually was born in Grady. Do a fact check on that, but I'm pretty sure that he was born in Grady Hospital. So yeah, Grady baby is just something that's synonymous with the city of Atlanta. That if you're a Grady baby, that means you're really from Atlanta.
The city.
Yeah, you're really from Atlanta.
You just said something interesting a couple conversations ago. You were talking about that you were covering the trap scene as a journalist. It made me think about just even what I do on this side of the camera is getting interviews and talking to people. With trap music being synonymous with violence, did your life ever get in danger, or did things get a little scary for you because you were covering something of that culture, that particular culture?
Well, I mean, covering things at like hood spots, what we call the hood clubs, sometimes there is a sense of danger. Like if you go covering something at Club Crucial, which is a club on Bankhead, years ago, there was always violence, there was always fights, there was always something that you had to like kind of watch your back and always kind of keep your eyes open, stay focused. But I kind of always felt like I had a sixth sense, and I knew there was something that was happening. You want to kind of, it's time to go and kind of remove yourself from something, from things. But I mean, this it's just the regular thing as far as, you get liquor, you get, music that's gonna make you very live, and then it's like you get like a lot of these, personalities in these small rooms and small spaces. Something can happen. And so yes, that was, things have happened in the past as far as like, you covering an event and then, something pops off, but you always want to make sure that you're staying focused and keeping your eyes open, especially as a journalist.
Has it ever gotten the issue where some of the artists felt that you were like telling too much of their story, or that you weren't telling enough of their story? Like it ever got personal on that end?
Never got personal because I always approach things as a professional. You know what I'm saying? I never like put anybody's name out in a bad sense, or I never like did anything for the hype. I always did things just to kind of like, you know, tell the story. Now if it was something that they did and they you know, I'm always going to be 100% with what I do. Like I'm a journalist by trade, so it's like
Yeah.
I'm not going to like sully someone's name for clickbait or anything of that nature. But if you're
Gotcha.
doing something bad, I'm definitely going to report on it.
Right.
So for me, it's really just about doing my job at the end of the day.
Yeah. And that's one that I can personally relate to, because at times it's like it does feel like you're kind of telling through, but you really your job is to tell.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I just wonder, was there ever like those conflicts of when it was like, yo, I gotta tell the story, and then someone getting personally mad at you, like ran a story about something that was publicly known?
Nah, no one has ever personally got mad at me. Like as far as
That's
as I
good.
know, you know, I have a good rapport with like most of the artists and you know their teams, and so for me, it's really just about like I said, I'm documenting a coach. I'm not in it for clickbait. There's some people who in it who just want to like you know put out messy content, but for me, I just want to tell the story.
So the story of trap music. With that being said, who do we credit as the inventors or inventor of the
Yeah.
trap music genre?
Yeah, so in the book, I kind of go back. I start, you know, with like what street music was in Atlanta, and it wasn't called trap music; it was just street music. But I'm gonna say Hitman Sammy Sam, and Hitman Sammy Sam was a guy who he was a wild dude. Anyone who is from Atlanta know about Hitman Sammy Sam. You got to YouTube, Google Hitman Sammy Sam,
Okay.
1988, and that was like that vibe of what Atlanta was back then, and you know, we had a lot of projects back then. You know, you had Takeoff, Grady Homes, Perry Homes, Carver Homes. It was a lot of public housing, and those were places that were considered a trap. And so that type of music kind of highlighted what was happening in that era. And so that was kind of what trap music, you know, started, I think, from Atlanta. And I think later on, T.I. pretty much coined it, you know, trap
Yeah.
music, coming out with the album Trap Music. That was like coined and said, okay, this is what this genre is, and put a name on it. And I think, you know, T.I. was amazing to brand it
Yeah.
and actually like, okay, this is what it is and this is what it's going to be. But before then, it was like you had guys like Hitman, Sammy Sam. You had a rap group called Causing Much Pain, A Damn Shame. Like you had a lot of artists who were doing like street music in the city prior to
Yeah.
it being like branded. This is what it was as far as trap.
You know, did you ever like find out about stories, because the trap music is covering pretty much dope boy era, street
Yeah.
era of Atlanta. Right now we have a lot of artists getting in trouble with their lyrics.
Yeah.
Did you ever hear stories back then of artists kind of getting in trouble with their lyrics, or is this kind of a new thing happening for us?
This is new because back then, guys who were in the street, they weren't rapping. You know, you had guys who were kind of like, kind of walking the line, but the guys who were actually in the streets, who was actually, they wanted to keep a low profile. They wanted to kind of stay out of the limelight.
Right.
I think this is a new generation where they want to kind of be out in front and they want to, show what they're doing on social media. They want to kind of brag, and it's just like, you know, you kind of hustling backwards because you putting yourself out there for, of course, the FBI to track you. But back then, like, you know, the 80s and the 90s, most of the guys who were really dope boys, they weren't really trying to be seen. They weren't really trying to like be rappers or like have their face publicized. They wanted to kind of be behind the scenes. And so this is really something new. This is for a new generation to kind of like, oh, we have this amount of money. We have these, you know, guns, posting guns on Instagram, which makes no sense. But, you know, this is just a different era.
Yeah. Do you think that's tied into just like, you know, coming up in the black community? I kind of have a perspective of, you know, because we haven't been given anything of substance about ourselves, that we strive to find it in exterior things, you know, motivated by ego. Do you find any like correlation with that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the book I talk about like what trap means and like trying to become untrapped, trying to use things in your environment to escape. And yeah, I think we always want to present ourselves as something more than what we come from in different ways. And so, in a lot of communities, there's only like 2 or 3 ways to get out of that. You know, you can become the dope man or you can become the preacher. You know what I'm saying? What are you going to become to kind of get yourself or make yourself to get yourself out of a situation? And so I just think that a lot of times we see kids have a lack of what they think is a lack of options. And so when you have a lack of options, you kind of gravitate towards what you think is successful. And if you think the dope man is successful, you may try to emulate what that represents, which could be negative.
Yeah.
So
Is our lyrics, in terms of what we just discussed, is it directly connected to the YSL case?
well, so what's going on with the YSL cases? The district attorney Fannie Willis, she's going to use. She said that she would. Well, in the affidavit. Let's go back. So the affidavit, you can read online, and in the affidavit, the district attorney basically pulls some lyrics from Young Thug, where she basically says that this is correlation to crimes that were committed in YSL.
Got you.
There's one particular lyric from a song called Anybody. I think that's the name of it. We can fact check. That Young Thug says, I didn't commit the crime, but I had something to do with that body. And that's a lyric that's actually in the affidavit. And so Fannie Willis, she's considering using those lyrics to say, okay, this is, he's admitting something, he's admitting a crime, right? And so she did a press conference months ago saying that the First Amendment doesn't protect rap lyrics. And in a sense, she's right, because we've seen over time and time again that rap lyrics has been used in court cases to convict rappers or charge rappers with certain crimes.
Yeah. And the lyric is, I never killed anybody, but I got something to do with that body.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got the streets on my back, carry it like I'm moving a body.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is the a particular lyric that you said that she'd be using against Young Thug.
She's gonna they pulled that particular lyric and put it in the affidavit, as far as saying that this is evidence that the prosecution is saying that Young Thug put a hit out on someone.
Yeah.
And he's bragging about it.
He's admitting it in this.
He's admitting it on record.
This is a song called Anybody by Young Thug.
Yeah.
What do you make of this, right? What is art, and what is just honestly just kind of recklessness too?
Yeah.
If you are doing legitimate crimes, what was the code back in the day? You had a low profile. You take it back to the Italian mob. It was about being low. But like you said, there's generations that are a little bit more in front of the camera, and but what's your thoughts about that? Do you think that's fair for her to use that lyric, or do you just let them know that?
I don't think it's fair. I definitely think that, rap is the only genre of art where you can say that someone is saying something on what we can consider a piece of art and use that against them. It's interesting because there was a white woman, and we can do some fact checking on this as well as far as her name, but there's a white woman who wrote a book about how to kill your husband. Mm-hmm. And she wrote the book and she killed her husband. Like, she killed her husband, right? Okay. So, but that book wasn't used in court against her, but she wrote a book about killing her husband. And so when you think about pieces of art, there isn't many cases where art is being used as evidence in criminal cases, unless it's tied to rap or tied to hip hop. We've seen it done with Snoop in '93 when Snoop was charged with murder. They used lyrics from Murder Was the Case against him. Of course, Snoop was acquitted, but again, lyrics were used in the court case.
Right.
So we've seen it happen time and time again where rappers are being used, rap lyrics are being used in court, but we haven't seen this with other art forms.
Yeah, it made me even think about, there's definitely a color conversation in terms of black artists, but I thought about Eminem. I think he was in trouble when he used to rap about certain things. He used to rap about killing his ex-wife, and that was a conversation too. Yeah. But I do want to talk about this Young Thug case a little bit more. You think Young Thug is gonna beat this?
It's a lot is stacked up against Young Thug, only because what it seems like what's happening. The prosecution, they're basically saying that he was the head honcho.
Yeah.
He was the ringleader. So if he's the ringleader, there's no one else who can he tell on. Like there's no one else that he can say, okay, this person was responsible for this. And so they're building a case against him. From what we're seeing now, they're building a case against him. And so they have witnesses who were willing to testify against him.
Yeah.
And so a lot can happen between now and the end of the case. Right now, they still haven't finished with jury selection.
Right.
they've been 2 months in, 3 months in, and they haven't finished with jury selection. So this is a case that's probably going to last up to a year. It's going to take about a year to finish this case. And a lot can happen between now and the conclusion of the case. Some things can happen in Young Thug's favor where, if evidence from, was retrieved illegally by a cop, the judge can throw it out. And so, that's, the evidence can be, something where it's okay, you can't use this evidence because it was retrieved, illegally.
Right.
So there's some things that can happen between now and then that could help his case, and there's some things that can hurt his case.
Right.
But right now, with him facing 20 years and the way the prosecution is pretty much gearing up to say that he was the guy, the ringleader.
Right.
It doesn't look good right now.
Yeah.
But so much can happen between now and the end of the case where he can get a little bit more leverage.
Yeah.
But a lot has to happen for that
Right
to happen.
now, it just seems like he might get that 20.
Well, he might get the 20 or they may give him 10. It just depends.
Like a
it's just
deal.
what the judge is up to the judge of how many years he's sentenced. But with the affidavit and all the crimes that they're charged him with, he can face up to 20 years.
Yeah. Just even hearing you talk about that, I'm just like, why would one even get themselves caught up in that at that height in your career? How much was it tied to tied to actually making money? Was it profitable with how they were running the things, or was it just out of pure ego and feeling like I can't be touched?
So you have to understand a lot of these. So when you have to look at a lot of these crimes that they're charging him with happened almost before he became famous, or like during his rise to fame.
Got you.
You're talking about going back to like 2013. And 2012, before Young Thug became this global sensation. So the FBI, they've been building this case for roughly a decade.
Why did it take so long?
Because it's that's what the FBI do.
They want to really stack it up.
They stack up everything against you, and then they wait till the right time to capture you. They
Go ahead.
They build up enough evidence. They get enough witnesses. They put everything in line, and then they get you. That's just basically how it works. It's like, it's not an overnight thing. Like, you watch TV dramas and it's like, we're going to catch this guy in 30 minutes or an hour. No, it's similar to The Wire, where it took them like an entire season for them to capture, I think, the Avon Barksdale crew. That's kind of how it is with real life. Like, it takes a long time. And so they've been building this case against Young Thug for roughly over a decade, probably about a decade. They've been like tracking him. And so if you read the affidavit, it's like, this is stuff that's happened like 2014, 2013, that they're like bringing it up now.
And now they're bringing it.
And so they're like, and it's like other members who have different cases. And so what they're doing is like, with the RICO charge, they can bring everybody in at once and say, okay, this is a crime organization, and saying that, okay, this is numerous crimes tied to this particular organization. But they've been tracking Young Thug YSL for years.
Okay. So just a real kind of a question attached to that, right? If the goal is to stop crime, why does one take so long to allow somebody who is doing crime to continue to maybe commit other crimes? And then you mentioned one thing about it being the right time.
Yeah.
Why is now the right time to get Young Thug?
So what they do is play the long game, right? They can arrest you now and say, okay, arrest this person on a gun charge, and okay, he may get a year or two, then he's out. But it's like, you're right. They should, when someone commits a crime, they probably should just say, okay, let's just go ahead. If this is such a dangerous organization, why didn't they stop YSL 5 years ago?
Right.
Why didn't they just stop them if we knew in 2015 they were committing these crimes? Why wait till 2022 to actually bring charges. And so basically they playing a long game. And so they're like, okay, we'll give them enough leeway to commit this crime. Okay, now they're basically just taking notes. All
It
right,
seems
this
very targeted.
yeah, it's definitely
The reason, just it's like, why would you? That's what my mind is like. Okay, you're supposed to stop crime, so if someone's doing something, let's put an end to it. But it seems like no, we want to watch them hang themselves,
yeah.
so that we can, I don't know. I guess the benefit is, I don't know.
But the benefit is you get them for more years. So
But
if you
what is that? See, I'm taking from a humanity approach. So
Okay.
people that's listening,
okay.
like, does that make you like? Why does it make them feel good that like I'm locking someone for 20 years? Is it financially beneficial to the someone like the FBI? Like, what's their motivation?
Well, you gotta understand it's a game as well, right? It's really, just like, if you're in a crime organization, if you're really doing crime, you feel like you have motives. Prosecution, cops, they all have motives as well. If you get a prosecutor who can, this is a big fish, right?
Yeah.
And so careers are made off of cases like this.
Okay.
Like, you understand, Fannie Willis is going after not just Young Thug, she's going after Donald Trump as well.
Got you.
In an entirely different case that's deal with voter suppression. So, she's going out after big fishes, right? It's an ego thing. It is. It's like if you can capture this person and say, okay, as a DA, and this is your job to capture people to get the violence off the street.
Right.
And it's like, okay, I got, someone who is one of the biggest perpetrators of violence.
Yeah.
It's something that's it's like a notch under
It's
your
your
belt.
flex.
It's like a notch under your belt. So yeah, for her, it's like for the district attorney, for the FBI, for cops, to get someone to say, of this magnitude is definitely beneficial for their careers.
One big thing about this that still creates its own debate is Gunna.
Yeah.
We all saw a video that was released with Gunna seemingly like he's cooperating with the law to, be able to move on with his life.
Yeah.
One is, do you think that video that dropped, was that Gunna snitching? In the theory of what snitching is and the theory of trap music, was that him snitching?
On that from if you just look at that video, you can say, okay, yeah, he said the prosecution basically wanted evidence of someone to say, okay, YSL isn't a record label, it's a street gang, right?
Right.
And so they basically hung a carrot in his face and said, okay, you can get out of jail if you say YSL is a street gang versus just being a record label. Now, the thing is this, we don't know if they're going to use that in the actual case, in the actual trial, right? But they got him on record saying that.
And it's out online.
It's out everywhere, but we don't even know if they're gonna, we don't know if the jury is gonna actually hear that, right?
Well, they're gonna hear it in their own public, like if they live, most people heard it, right?
Well, so the thing, so when they get people on the jury, they want to get people who are not really familiar with the case.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's one of the issues that they're having right now because it's such a big case.
Yeah.
A lot of people have already heard of. So what's going to probably happen with the jury selection is there's probably going to be older individuals who are not really familiar with the YSL Young Thug brand.
Yeah.
Like they're going to get probably going to be an older crowd who has the time to actually commit to a criminal case that's going to take a year.
Right.
So moving backwards, it's like, okay, so you want to get a jury that doesn't really know about what's happening, but you're right. A lot of people did hear about what Gunna said and if he snitched or not. He did say that YSL, they got him to say YSL was a street gang.
Yeah, and actually have the video just for audio purposes.
Born.
1 second, have I? It's just interesting, because it did seem like from the definition that I was familiar with snitching, which was, if you do a crime, you're supposed to kind of just tell all, take all that comes with it. You're not supposed to point any fingers or incriminate anybody. So, hearing this was quite interesting.
Statement, whether or not you agree or acknowledge that the statements are true. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
I became affiliated YSL is a music label and a gang, and you have personal knowledge that members or associates of YSL have committed crimes in furtherance of the gang.
Yes, ma'am.
You were present when law enforcement officers stopped the vehicle in which you were present along with Jeffrey Williams, wherein hydrocodone, methamphetamines, and a firearm were recovered. These items did not belong to you.
Yes, ma'am.
And do you acknowledge the following statement? I recognize, accept, and deeply regret that my talent and music indirectly furthered YSL the gang to the detriment of my community. YSL as a gang must end. Is that your statement or acknowledgement?
Yes.
So was that snitching?
You know,
And hearing it right, you know,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
why I wanted to play it.
I heard it when it was when it first came out. Like I say, it's, you know, when at the end of the day, it's like this. It's like, okay, what does YSL think? Because I think in it, you know,
Yeah.
this is really what what it boils down to. Is this what Young Thug consider? Like, we don't know what kind of conversations or any conversations that was had prior or whatever. We don't know. Like, I read the entire indictment. Like, it's like, you know, Gunna really didn't have much on Gunna.
Yeah.
As far as, like, he almost kind of got like wrapped in with it being a RICO. So he didn't really, like, you know, for once I didn't really understand why he was, you know, arrested in the first place. And then you realize, okay, they're gonna use him, you know, to try to build their case against what they're saying is, you know, YSL is a gang versus it being a record label. So it's just, you know, a lot is gonna happen between now and the end of this case, and we don't know, like I say, if they're going to use that particular soundbite. We don't know if they're going to use that in the actual court case. Now, his lawyer came out last week and said Gunna did not snitch. Like, Gunna is not, you know, he didn't snitch. So, you know, there's this argument about what happened and what didn't happen.
Yeah.
But I think if you're taking it from a legal standpoint, you might want to wait and see if that evidence is actually used in the case.
Gotcha.
Because it may not be, because the prosecution may not use that soundbite, that particular soundbite.
Right, I've heard that too.
For, you know what I'm saying? Like, the jury may never see that. The jury may never even hear any of that, right? But it you know, it was something that they dangled in his face to get out of jail right before Christmas. They came to him and said, you know, you say these words and you get an early release.
Yeah.
Time served.
Yeah, it does seem that you know, the court of public opinion holds a lot of weight to a rap artist, such as Gunna. Do you think he'll survive these snitch allegations? And if so, how?
You gotta. So the thing is this, right? I think so. When you think about hip hop, it's two facets of when we talk about the audience, right? You have listeners and you have consumers. Now, the listeners, they're casually, you know, they're somewhere, they'll listen to a song, they'll listen to an album, but they're not consumers, right? The average consumer of hip hop doesn't care about snitching. They don't even live in that world. Like, they can't even grasp the idea of what it means to snitch or not snitch. They're not really the consumer, the person who's buying the album, the person who's buying the $150 concert ticket, the person who's buying the fan merchandise. Those consumers, they don't care about snitching because they're not living in their world. Like, they're basically living vicariously through these rap artists. They're living vicariously through black men. So for them, if Gunna's able to make good music, if he's able to come back and make good music, I think the consumer they won't even think of that. But he has to make good music. I think that's really the whole thing of, like, if he can continue to make, like, music that people love, like, regardless of what happens in this case, the consumer will gravitate towards him. And I think at the end of the day, that's all that matters, is the consumer.
Yeah.
If you're a business person, you worry about the consumer. You're not really paying attention to the listener.
It's interesting because I do kind of align with that in terms of, if he comes out with a fire song, then I think it just will naturally, people will just kind of, like, they can't deny it.
Oh, yeah.
And that's just, you know, even I think from a street standpoint, you know, there's going to be people that's going to talk their shit.
Oh, yeah.
But I had just envisioned him just kind of like talking about addressing the court case with a fire song. I had jokingly said I called it like I got hit with the RICO, I got hit with the RICO, and just make
Yeah.
it fire. I think that could easily kind of win people over, because once you address the elephant in the room, you know, you can kind of like keep it pushing. But snitching has recently came back up in our headlines regarding T.I. and Boosie.
Yeah.
Little Boosie would do Vlad TV and said that he had squashed their joint album
Yeah.
because T.I. supposedly snitched on his dead cousin. A couple things to unpack there. Can you snitch on somebody that has passed away? And when was the first time you heard about someone actually doing that? Like that as a strategic tactic to get out of a situation?
I've never heard of anyone that could, from a legal standpoint,
Right.
I've never heard of that. That doesn't mean that hasn't happened before. And yeah, and so we have to understand. So let's go backwards. So I think T.I. said it on a platform, like a podcast. And so we know, like a lot of times with podcasts, people want to just say things to
for clicks.
It's clicks, and like, he said this and that, you know. So we don't know if he was just joking in the heat of the moment or if it was just something that he just said off the top. We don't really know that. I know that he basically produced papers saying that this wasn't the case, and that, you know, he has papers saying that he didn't say that it was just something that he said that he was jokingly saying. So, you know, but I don't really understand. I don't understand the dynamics of their relationship. I thought they were close enough where they could just call each other and be like, look, you know, say this is what it is. You know, talk to each other like men and say, okay, if you feel this way, let's move this way. But I don't know. It just seemed like they hadn't had that conversation before that clip went viral. And so that's just like the weird thing about it, as far as like the dynamics of their relationship. Like, why wasn't there a conversation had beforehand? You know, before that particular interview.
Why is snitching, you know, such a taboo thing in our culture? Why is it that we see these two brothers that seemingly, you know, were friends kind of fall out? Why is it that we are giving Gunna a hard time, ultimately trying to save his career, his business, his family's well-being? Like, why is snitching such like not on code when it comes to the Black American experience?
Yeah, and it's just not the Black American experience. I think it's, you know, it's started with mafia. You talk about somebody like, you know, Sammy the Bull, you know, someone who snitched on the entire mafia. So it's not something that's new, particularly when it comes to like, you know, the street code or whatever. It's just something that's been around. I think it's like this. It's like when you're participating in crime, you have to know that there's what we call hazards that you're gonna face when you're participating in crime. You know, someone close to you may get shot. You know, you may get shot. You may get arrested. Someone may snitch on you. Like, these are hazards that occur when you decide to go into the street life. Like, we know that this has always happened. It's been happening for decades. In the 70s, you know, there were, you know, people kingpins, famous kingpins in New York who snitched on other kingpins.
Yeah.
So this is not something new. I think in our community, we have to kind of wake up and understand what the street code of snitching is. Like, it wasn't about just the average citizen being able to, you know, say this is what happened, or, you know, they were, you know, a victim of a crime or things of that nature. It wasn't that. It's just people who were a part of an organization. And if they had that code where, look, if somebody get, you know, caught, no one is going to tell, that's between that organization. It's not between anybody else to say if someone else snitched or not.
Right.
It's between the people who were involved in that particular crime or organization. If they made a pact within themselves, I think that's what it is. I don't think outsiders should have an opinion about what someone did if it's not their business. Like, if it's not your business, like, why do you even care? Like,
Well, people seem very invested on calling T.I. snitch. You know, we just talked about, as far as Gunna, and you gave your opinion if his career will survive, you know, following the snitch allegations. Do you think the same could be said for T.I. if one day some paperwork comes out and it's like, yo, he did, you know, work with us, he did cooperate? What happens to his career?
Well, I mean, I think the good thing about T.I. is that he's pretty much put himself in a position where he doesn't have to depend on rap. So yeah, if you're like talking to that audience where it's like, okay, all right, they really care about that type of stuff.
Yeah.
But if you're act, if you can produce movies, if you can, produce shows, if you got like different joint, businesses, like a lot of this stuff doesn't matter to like the grand scheme of the world, right?
Right.
It's only like in our communities where
Yeah.
it's like we get up in arms about certain things, but in the grand scheme of things, it's like if you're able to go on a movie set and have a movie with Denzel Washington, do you think the people who are watching the Denzel Washington movie care about if
Got you.
the actor next to him snitched or not? So it's just really something that's very big in our community, but in the grand scheme of things, people who are consumers of art don't really care about this stuff.
Right. And I guess, when I look at it, snitching, why I would feel indifferent about someone snitching on me, I think it's because I got so much stuff already stacked up against me.
Yeah.
And it's like to see someone that looks like me, because predominantly that's where the snitching happens, someone that's close by you, they're gonna look like me, and it's like, damn, like I already got the world against me as a black person, and now you're kind of helping them. So it's kind of like, I can imagine back in African days when you had the slave catchers. It's like another brother that's like, he hid behind that tree. It's like, like my guy, like really. So I think that's kind of the energy of it, and white America can't relate probably to that, right?
So, well, they can in a sense, they can,
Okay.
but because it happens on like federal levels where you have like these federal companies that go get caught in and they snitch on each other. They do it all the time. But if you want to go, let's go back to Africa and talk about the slave trade and how that was wrote. A lot, but even back then they used us we were used against each other. Like they would have other tribes to go into certain villages to get slaves,
Check them on the boat.
There's always been that dynamic. And so you have to understand what happens when someone gets into those rooms where the prosecutor or the detective can basically, force you to say, okay, this is what's happened. You facing 20 years in life. You got a family at home. These are your ways out. And so they've been playing this game forever. They know the game. They know that you're going to want your freedom over, for the most part. There's some guys who will say, look, and there's some guys in the YSL who were in YSL who wouldn't take a plea.
Right.
Like there's some guys who said, no, they decided to go to trial and take their chances. And so we're just going to see what happens. But everybody, they're not mentally strong to take that, to say, okay, can you really sit down in a cell full of a bunch of men for 20 years? Do you really want to do that?
Yeah, I get it.
So you got to understand what they're throwing at them.
I think it does deal with like just the code, right? Every system or every organization, there's a code.
Yeah.
Even with our people, there's a certain unspoken black code on different things. When someone goes against the code, we're up in arms about it. And so I think when you call yourself a gangster, because I'm someone that enjoys watching mob documentaries and really appreciate the guys that say, yo, I'm dedicated to this life. I think that's what the issue is. It's like you're selling something that you're not even really living.
Oh yeah.
Cause you're supposed to think about that. You're supposed to be like, till the wheels fall off. This is the life I chose. I'm gonna ride it out and I'm gonna go out like a G. And I think that's always disheartening when we see brothers kind of fold.
Yeah, so you have people, and that's the crazy thing about art, right? Is that you can paint any type of art that you want without actually having that experience if you're a good painter, right? And with rap, we've seen rappers who can talk to their streets, but they're not really built for it, right? They're not really built for what it takes, because if you in the streets, like I said, you have to be prepared for the hazards as well. If you're going to be in the streets, you're going to have to be prepared for getting locked up. You're going to have to be prepared for the violence that may occur. You got to be prepared for individuals who may snitch on you. You have to be prepared for all of this before you even step one foot and say, this is the life I want to choose. And if this isn't your life, there's other places you can work. Like you just, get a trade, like find another way to make your money to feed your family. There's not, crime isn't the only way for you to get it.
Now, this isn't the first time that Atlanta's seen a big RICO case in hip hop. I want to talk about DJ Drama.
Yeah.
He would end up getting in trouble for the sales of mixtapes, and it seemed like it was like a petty reason. He didn't have like a particular label or something on his mixtape. One is, do you know why he was even targeted in the first place? And why do you think he was targeted?
So we have to understand the time frame of this, right? I'm thinking this is like 2007, 2008. This is a time frame where mixtapes are like on the rise, and the record companies, they don't know what the hell is going on, right?
Right.
You got to understand, like in the 90s, CDs were popping. In the 80s, you had the records, and so, you know, most record labels knew that, you know, if they put out a certain artist, they were going to recoup their money, sell 1 million copies, hard copies. The digital age came, and they didn't know how to adjust to it initially, right? And so you get someone like a DJ Drama, the affiliates, they came and they were pretty much killing the mixtape game. The dedication albums, he did the young Jeezy, Trap or Die, and Drama basically using these he would call like, you know, these street albums, going directly to the consumer.
Right.
And it's like, you know, the record labels are up in arms, and so he was the RIAA. They were the ones who basically put this out to say, okay, he's selling the music illegally.
Gotcha.
And so it was really just I think something that the record companies, they didn't really understand what was happening at the time.
Right.
And so they basically used DJ Drama and the affiliates of his mixtape business to say, okay, we're going to go after what they considered was bootleg music.
Right.
But it was really just, you know, going directly to consumers, and it was
Right.
almost like marketing projects where artists can build names for themselves before they even came out with an album.
Right.
The record labels eventually got to, you know, build this rapport with, you know, the mixtape DJs, and now you saw like mixtapes becoming out, the official mixtape,
Right.
things of that nature.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it was just a time period where the record labels didn't understand what was going on, and so they thought that they were going to lose large amounts of money because of mixtapes, and yeah, they were arrested. DJ Drama was arrested
Yep.
basically for
Him and Don Cannon.
Yeah, Don Cannon for selling mixtapes.
And I think that, so just in I guess in short, it was pretty much over money. It was just a business.
They thought that the record labels thought that they were disrupting the flow of money with mixtapes.
Yep.
They didn't understand how to use mixtapes as a marketing tool back then. They didn't understand it. Instead of like going to DJ Drama and say, look, how do we make money? How do we do what you're doing? They got the feds on them. They got the FBI on them. And you know, so it was a money thing. They didn't really understand.
That's really, even hearing you talk about this is really kind of eye-opening from the level of, you know, we talk about Black ownership,
Yeah.
and controlling spaces that we operate and live off of. And it seemed like Drama had created an industry for himself that was booming. And it just makes me see like, dang, it's like they just doesn't seem like they want us to have control. Like, because we talk about that. It seems like, yeah, when we do figure it out, they'll figure out a way to slow that down if they're not a part of it. I mean, any thoughts about just even that perspective?
Yeah, no, it's anytime you disrupt, you're a disruptor. They're gonna try to find a way. You gotta understand. So, like a few years before the DJ Drama, you think about Napster.
Yeah.
And like the Napster whole situation
LimeWire and all that.
LimeWire and all that. And so anytime you disrupt the flow, they try to figure out because you gotta understand, most of these executives in TV, radio, and they're older individuals who not necessarily paying attention, right? And when you don't pay attention, stuff happens, and it's like, okay, this mixtape thing happened, this, you know, the file sharing thing happened, and they didn't know how to adjust quick enough. And so they get scared, they get paranoid. And so we see it happening all the time. It's just, you know, anytime you're a disruptor, you're going to get pushback. You know, you're going to get people always going to question, you know, this new thing. Instead of them trying to work with you, they'll try to work against you first, to try to stop you first, before they say, okay, before your movement becomes so big where it's like, okay, we got to give it up. We got to let you do what you're doing because we, you know, this movement is just too strong.
You know, in your book, to kind of pivot back into the book and just understanding what is a trap artist, just by definition, how do you define a trap artist? Because somebody could just be rapping about the street. Like, what's the definition of that?
Yeah, so the trap sound was basically really indicative of the Atlanta sound. It's artists who you can hear it with the music, you can hear it with the beats and production. Initially, the production producers such as DJ Toon, Zaytoven, Shawty Red, they created this sound where you knew that it was indicative of Atlanta. It was indicative of the street movement that was happening in Atlanta. The flow was kind of indicative of Atlanta slang. Like you felt like you were in Atlanta. You were talking to someone in Atlanta when you hear T.I., when you hear a Gucci, like you're hearing like this Atlanta sound. And that was basically what it was. It was a kind of capturing the street moments of Atlanta and putting it on record. That's basically what the trap music was starting out. Was just what you would see of Atlanta street music.
Yep.
This is how it sounds.
Okay. In one part of your book, you talked about artists that we lost.
Yeah.
Do you off top know some of the names of the people that we lost that you can just maybe name off for us?
Man, it's too many, man. Like, we can just talk about this year. Trouble, well, in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Someone like Trouble who was killed. Snooty Wild, Takeoff from the Migos. This guy named Slim Duncan who was Waka Flocka's artist. There's so many artists who have passed, unfortunately, and just like due to a lot of senseless violence that didn't have to take place over this, last decade.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned earlier, it's like, when Tupac passed, it was like such a shock for someone of that magnitude to pass. And now it's like, it's becoming commonplace for us to see rappers die. Like every few months we're seeing that,
And it's kind of desensitizing us a bit.
Almost, it is. It's like, people. It's almost like, we're shocked for a moment, and it's like, oh, everybody goes back to normal. And it's something that needs to be said. We need to kind of like speak out about what's happening in our communities.
Now, one person that will speak on it was Little Boosie.
Yeah.
And he advises a lot of street rappers to leave their hometown.
Yeah.
I guess we can all think about the psychology behind that. It does kind of like hate or envy kind of is created amongst people that maybe have seen you come up the ranks and they didn't make it with you. Just your thoughts on that statement alone. Do you think that's good advice for street rappers?
That's great advice. Several years ago, I covered this guy named Doe B. So Doe B was signed to Grand Hustle, and Doe B was what I call like almost, he was someone who could really change the dynamics of Alabama or hip hop, right? Before Doe B, Alabama they didn't really have any artists that broke out on the national scene.
Right.
Doe B was an artist who could have gone national and created an industry within that city. Mm-hmm. So we have to understand about rappers. When a rapper becomes a national figure, or a singer becomes a national figure, it creates industries, right?
Yep.
So now you have managers who are getting paid. You have graphic designers who are getting paid. You have photographers who are getting paid. You have videographers who are getting paid. All these people are getting paid based off of this one artist's success, right?
Yep.
And I thought that Doe B could have did the same thing to Montgomery, Alabama, right? Signed to T.I., had the flow, had that coolness that Biggie had, but on the southern tip, right? And I thought that, man, this dude could really be that next person to really put Alabama on the map from a hip hop standpoint. Mm-hmm. And I think during like a holiday, Doe B went back to Montgomery. He was at a small, almost like a juke joint, like a small juke joint. And I think just jealousy, someone confronted him because he was the guy who made it out. And, they end up killing Doe B based off of jealousy and over a small disagreement.
Yeah.
But Doe B had got to a point where he never had to go back. He
Right.
never had to go back home.
Right.
But he went back to hang with the people who he grew up with, the people
Right.
who he considered family. But jealousy was something that took him out. And we've seen this time and time again where individuals go back home and, they meet violence in unfortunate circumstances.
Yeah, same thing can be said about Young Dolph.
Dolph,
Same
yeah.
thing could be said about Nipsey Hussle.
Yeah.
Why do you think trap artists and street rappers are getting killed so much now.
But we have to understand that like our vibrations matter, right? Anything you put out, you gotta understand what can come back to you.
Yeah.
You know, even though artists are telling their stories, you know, sometimes, you know, you have people who want to try you. You have people who want to test you. People who want to almost just take you out over jealousy or just because they have some type of hate or hatred or they just want to try you. You got to understand, like, a lot of this stuff, like, we're not seeing the same type of violence happening with, like, neo soul artists.
Right.
Like, neo soul artists aren't,
Right.
you know what I'm saying? So it's like, if you put out this vibration, even though you're telling the story of your community, you got to understand that there are repercussions to the vibrations that you put out.
Yeah.
And you got to understand that some of this stuff can come back to you. And so there are individuals who are, you know, meet that vibration at the same level that is presented.
You know, I'm just thinking about, you know, we did lose a few people. We, at a fever pitch, there was the beef between Gucci Mane and Jeezy.
Yeah.
And that was like where there was, you know, a gentleman got killed on Jeezy's side. And that was kind of a fever pitch. What did you think about when you saw them kind of reunite and come together? And were you covering the scene then when those two were going back and forth?
Yeah, that was interesting. Like when when I initially started in journalism, that incident occurred where Gucci Mane he shot someone who he said it was a home invasion.
Yeah.
The guy ended up dead, and so that was like 2005, I think. And so it was, you know, back then we didn't know what was going to happen with Gucci. Like, we didn't know if he was going to go to jail for life. We didn't know if, you know, what was going to happen. He ended up getting off on that particular case, but he was going back and forth on other cases. And so it was great to see Gucci and Jeezy back together, just to be on the same stage. Because there was times where we never thought that they could be in the same room together. You know, of course, years ago, before all this other stuff happened, they did the song Icy together. And it was like, man, like, these are like the next two trap artists to kind of like come out of Atlanta, Gucci and Jeezy, and they're on one of the biggest songs. And shout out to Lil Will. Lil Will did the hook on So Icy. And, you know, both guys had so much promise with that song, showed so much promise. And for years, it was just like this, you know, tension between the two. And it was good to see those brothers back together for the versus battle, to see that they squash things. And now I think they're even doing shows. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're on the same ticket, which is like big for Gucci and Jeezy to be on the same lineup on the same show for a concert. But it also showed growth, and it also showed that, you know, you can mature in trap, and it's good to see them mature. It's good for them to say, okay, we saw them at this age, now we get to see them in their early 40s and like really understanding that there's more to life. You know, like Gucci's like posting pictures of his daughter now, like, you know what I'm saying, like on Instagram, and it's something that you probably wouldn't have imagined 10 years ago.
Is there an age limit to trap music? You know, you got Jay-Z talking about, you know, he's gonna keep rapping, and, you know, Nas has been doing his thing out here. Is there an age limit to trap music artists?
That's interesting because, you know, trap isn't as old as Jay-Z or not. Like, trap came, I would say, like, you know, the official, you know, people became aware of trap music probably the early 2000s. You know, of course, Jay and Nas, they came out a little bit before that. I think you should be able to, you know, I think that was an interesting thing, right? It's like, does the audience want these artists to mature, right?
Okay.
You know, does the audience want, let's say, the consumer want these artists to mature? Because there's a certain, like, I think, excitement that comes with hearing an artist talk about those days, talk about being in the trap, talk about, you know, dodging the police and trying to outsmart the police. And so if they mature past that, you know, will the audience still pay attention? You know, we saw that Jeezy, you know, he had several projects where he was trying to like make that shift, where he was trying to like be more spiritual. And you know, he was trying to do things outside of just that trap, and people didn't respond the same way. But when he came back with that Snowfall, it was just like the Snowfall mixtape. Like people were like, oh man, this is what we want. We want that street music. So I don't think there's an age limit to per se in trap music, but at the same time, I don't know if they're able to mature outside of just talking about that content.
Right. Speaking of Jeezy, there was a moment when Puff, Diddy Combs, he came through and did Boys in the Hood.
Yeah.
Why didn't Boys in the Hood take off, or why didn't it last for long?
Yeah, so Boys in the Hood was almost like this. They wanted to kind of like paint it as this Southern NWA, where you had different, because all of them were solo artists. Like all of them were like, solo, had their own like movements, whatsoever. So they had a lot of promise coming out. We thought that, Boys in the Hood was going to be that next, like the Southern version of NWA. But I just think I think personal reasons, a lot of the guys had personal issues, few, dealing with different issues, from family and with the law. So it's like, they didn't really get that same, I guess they didn't have the same push like as Jeezy had. And Jeezy was able to kind of have a great career following Boys in the Hood.
That seemed like that was his platform, his amplifier.
It was one of them. Like, Jeezy had like this perfect storm where he had the Trap or Die mixtape, which was like an amazing mixtape. He had the Boys in the Hood, being a part of that movement, and he had his own movement, being signed to Def Jam. So I think everything just kind of worked in Jeezy's favor as far as like who he was surrounded with during his rise versus the other artists. They didn't really have that same support that Jeezy had, but Jeezy, he was someone who could take the support that he has and take it to another level.
Yeah, and that just seemed like that was an attempt to kind of, put some backing behind the trap music scene, with Puffy getting behind it.
Yeah.
And he brings his resources.
Yeah.
It makes me think about black ownership in the trap music industry and how that changes. Lil Jon is of the crunk music era. And then if you look at Lil Jon's music now, it's more so he's doing like, big residencies. He's a DJ, he's playing like other type of music. Yeah. Would you consider Lil Jon like a sellout for, I guess, not continuing that hip hop, that Southern hip hop wave?
Well, he was doing crunk. So Lil Jon was doing crunk, and now he's more doing like, he does like EDM, he does like house, like he does everything now. He does like a mixture of everything. I think Lil Jon is a staple of Atlanta's history, right? Atlanta's culture. And, him bringing, you gotta understand, like, there was this album called the So Def Bass All Stars back in the mid 90s. And Lil Jon was partly responsible for bringing bass music culture to a national scene, because bass music was something that was really like a small Atlanta, small Miami type thing, form of music that you just didn't see nationally. And Lil Jon could be credited for taking it national, and also, taking crunk music to a whole entirely different level. I think, we've seen growth with Lil Jon. I think we have to like salute Lil Jon for him, to still be able to get a good check, to still be able to like, and he's still representing Atlanta. Like, he's still gonna have an A-hat. He's still gonna be, he's still that Atlanta dude, but he's in Vegas and he's in other cities, doing these big stages, these big festivals. So, but it shows you the magnitude of like what Atlanta can become, So I think he's really like a testament of what that era represents.
Yeah. In terms of just like corporation and big business, you have QC, the record label. They are putting people that are, somewhat could be considered new trap sound, new trap music. As far as Lil Baby and a couple other people that everyone is tapped into right now. Why do you think they sold for $300 million? Based off of your vantage point, because some people may not understand why. Yeah,
so QC selling for $300 million. A lot of people were upset because they're like, why would you sell such a prominent label for so much? And you can look at someone like a Cash Money, and it's like, Cash Money, they still haven't sold. Like, they're still, owned by Slim and Baby for the most part. And so it's like, you see the success of Cash Money, you're like, wow, QC could have really been that same version,
Yeah.
within themselves and held on to like the ownership. But we don't really know as far as like what they have planned next, right? Because you can take that 300 million and you can do something else with it. You can go into film, you can go into television, you can do things. It's a type of money that can like help you spread your wings in ways that you couldn't before.
Gotcha.
So from that standpoint, you can understand. And I think as black people, we really harp on ownership because we've seen it so many times. We can go back to BET selling to Viacom. Like, a lot of black people were upset about BET, going that route where it was something that was black owned and something that we can call our own. And so I remember back, when that sale took place, we were having the same conversations about, should black people sell out? Should we just keep on, hold on to stuff that we build and pass it on to our next generation? It's something that we could just pass on, keep passing on. But for QC, we don't really know as far as what they have planned next because it's like, okay, they were able to build a brand where you have Migos, Lil Baby. I think they managed Cardi B. They were managing Cardi B for a while. Lil Yachty.
Right.
And so you have all these successful groups under this one umbrella. And it's like, okay, I think what's smart is that, with hip hop, everything runs its course. And so I think before things went downhill or things, not saying things would have went downhill because you got Lil Baby. I think Lil Baby's going to be hot for at least the next decade, right? Yeah. But I think before things, kind of went sideways, they probably said, okay, let's sell now. Instead, we can use this money to do other things outside of just the actual QC label. So it's something that, we have to kind of look at both ways, and, I think it's something I think some people saw it as problematic for them selling, but they have to look at their stance as well.
Yeah. And, I was on record for kind of at least critiquing that sale of QC just because in my lifetime, I would love to see more examples of us just keeping it and building it because I do think there should be a level of code. We don't have a lot of black corporations that I think of compared to our counterparts.
Yeah.
And they just kind of unintentionally pass it along to each other because they collectively own it, right? And I think the conversation is, what is selling out? I think you can get away with selling to another black person. If I sold a company to you, that is business. But when it's something that has meaning to the culture, I think that's when people feel like slighted by the sale. So that's BET, and I do think that kind of goes with QC. Pierre of QC had mentioned that he feels like he was selling in, I think was how he quoted it. So yeah, that's my stance on that particular matter. But I do think about, what do we see the future of trap music? Where does it go? Is trap music still alive, or has it kind of ran its course as well?
So, it's interesting, because trap music, when it first initially came out, I thought it was going to be like crunk. I thought, it'd get like a 3 or 4 year run, and it was like, okay, what's next? Because Atlanta, when we decided, when we became this global, center of hip hop, following Outkast, like, Atlanta became almost, some people call it the Mecca of hip hop, even though, New York is the birthplace. Atlanta was where, the culture was pretty much being moved and pushed in the city of Atlanta. And so the reason why it was happening because we were changing every few years. Like, you had the Dungeon Family era, and then a few years later you had the Crunk era, and then a few years later you had the Snap era, but then you had futuristic swag. And so you had all these subgenres that were coming up and giving Atlanta this new voice. And when trap music came, we initially thought, okay, this would be a few years and then something else was gonna come. But with trap music, it just kept going, right? It kept growing where it was like, it almost like changed generations. Like it went from T.I., Gucci, and Jeezy, and they passed the baton to Future, Young Thug, and Migos. And then that group passed the torch to Lil Baby and Gunna. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like, it just continued to like grow and continue to like take on its own life form. And I think it's still moving. You look at Lil Baby. Like Lil Baby is arguably the biggest rap artist today. And he does what you would call trap music, straight from Oakland City. straight from Atlanta, and Lil Baby is not slowing down anytime soon. So I think you can see that there's still, people still are gravitating towards the music, gravitating towards the sound. And it's not just an Atlanta thing. Like, I have a whole chapter about the global impact of trap music, where I point out trap music in China. There's trap music in Mexico, trap music in Africa. Every continent on the globe, pretty much, there is some form of trap music where they're using those 808s and snares, where it's like, oh man, this sounds like an Atlanta song, but it's like, they're talking in Spanish, so they're rapping in Spanish. So it's like, the global sound of trap music continues, but we have to see where, like, as far as what happens with the Atlanta movement.
Yeah, I wonder, just, earlier we were talking about people that have passed away in trap music. I wonder, from your perspective, and I want to touch on Takeoff's killing. From your perspective, do you want to see maybe trap music go a different path? And does Takeoff's death, or did it hurt the trajectory of trap music? Like, because he was such a big artist that should never have been touched, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It should never have happened. Do you think, how does that impact us in the trap music scene?
So, being a journalist, I always want people to tell the real story, right? I always want people to be able to whether it's, writing, whether it's film, whether it's a documentary, whether it's a TV show, whether it's rap. I want people to be able to tell their story from an authentic standpoint. And I don't want it to be watered down. I want you to tell me the ugly part of what's happening. I want you to tell me the reality of it. Don't sugarcoat, right? But at the same time, it's like, we talk about vibrations and the stuff that you put out. You can expect, for it to come back to you. I don't want rappers to edit themselves, but at the same time, I want them to be true as well, because there's a lot of artists out here who are making trap music who have never been to the trap.
Right.
They've never been in these situations, and so they're only doing it for money. They're doing it just, for a record deal or to get, popular on TikTok.
What do you say to the fake trap rappers?
Well, we hope they will stop. But it's like, but it's like, we live in a capitalistic society where people will copy anything that they feel will give them success. And if there's an audience who can't tell the difference between a real person who's actually lived it and a person who's like lying, I think that's where the trouble is, where it's like the audience, they don't even care if you did it or not, as long as it sounds
how do we
good.
tell as an audience then? How could I tell someone's faking?
You almost can't, because it's almost like, it's like an actor. How can you tell if an actor doesn't believe what they're portraying, right?
Understand.
You have good actors who are just mimicking what they've heard before, and they're just putting it on record. And that's unfortunate, because they're misleading a lot of people. They're misleading a lot of people that think you have to live this type of way to be cool, to be successful, or that you have to do drugs, you got to do perks, you got to participate in all type of craziness, when that shouldn't really be the case.
You kind of said something, because it touches on Black masculinity, the definition of that.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna throw a question that might sound wild, but this is my style of interviewing.
No, it's all good.
Do you think a gay trap rapper can exist?
Yeah, I think so. I think because I think rap has gone so big that the consumer doesn't really care anymore, right?
Okay.
I think there was a time in hip hop, particularly in the 90s, where you had to come from a place, right?
Yeah.
You had to come from something. Now you don't really have to come from anything. You just have to make good music, right? You can be a kid in Nebraska making a TikTok in your basement, and if people like what you're making, they'll gravitate towards you. So it's just a different time, and I think when you look at someone like a Saucy Santana, he doesn't really make trap music per se.
The sound is
but his sound it has a trap sound, and he's gotten success as an openly gay rapper. Even the Lil Nas X, he's I don't know if he the first song was like a trap country song.
Yeah.
And so I guess but he makes all types of music. He doesn't really fit into any type of category. I just think this generation now, they don't really care like anymore. Like, I think before, like, in the 90s and early 2000s, I think it was like you really had to be a certain type of way to be a rapper. Yeah. You really had to come from a place. You had to come from a city. You had to come from an like a group. And now it's just, I think the consumer, they only care if you make good music. They don't care what you are, who you are, as long as the music is good.
Yeah. And kind of as we start closing out, were you surprised when Takeoff was killed? And how did you find out?
Yeah, it was shocking because it's like I had witnessed Migos rise like firsthand, right? I remember like had to be 2011 or 2012 when they hosted a mixtape party at the QC label, and they invited me out. This was before anyone really knew who they were.
Yeah.
And it was just like, man, like it was interesting because they would kind of like finish each other's sentences. I interviewed them, they would finish each other's sentences. And it was like almost like a 3-man weave. Like in basketball, you had a 3-man weave where you kind of like, you know, they were really connected as a group. And you rarely see groups that are like connected where it's like they're finishing each other's sentences. And that's how the Migos were. That's when I first noticed before they even came out.
So you knew they were special, you could tell.
I knew they were special, and then it was like when hearing the music, I'm like, man, like they're like rapping in a way that, you know, you're not really hearing, you know, like they were kind of almost did with the triplet rhyme scheme, pretty much introducing this to this generation. It was like they didn't sound like anybody at that time. And so it was I think it was the night of Halloween actually, and I was asleep. Someone called me like at 5 a.m. They kept calling me. Like I was getting like calls like back to back to back. I was ignoring the calls, and I finally picked up, and I'm basically half asleep. I'm like, you know, what's up? Like, why you keep calling me? And they said Takeoff that passed, and I'm just like, no, it's no way. No way he passed. And then I'm like going online, and I'm like seeing like all these people like, you know, saying that Takeoff passed, and it's just like, man, because it's like, you know, Takeoff was like the most unassuming dude. Like he was so cool.
Right.
He didn't really, he wasn't in the mix. He was just a guy who wanted to make music. Yeah. He was just a person that really just loved the music, the art of it. And his death was really like, you know, shocking and sad in so many ways. And, you know, I just, you know, you want that to be like a message to say, you hate for that to be a message that he has to lose his life for that, but for it to be a wake up call to say, you know, things have to change, and like we really need to kind of like look within these young brothers, young brothers and sisters need to really look at what's happening. And I think because right now it's like they're not even thinking twice about gun violence. They just pulling triggers without even thinking about it. Like, you know, they don't even fight no more. Like, you know, you're ending somebody's life based off of something that can be solved if you just talk through it. Like, just, you know, take a moment, talk through it, and just let it go. And if you're mad about something, just, you know, walk away from the incident. Don't just, you know, think you can take somebody's life, because you're taking someone's, you know, family member, like people, you know what I'm saying? Like you're actually, you know, causing an entire shift of someone's family by taking their life. And it's something that could be solved easily through a conversation. You know, it doesn't have to result to you pulling the trigger just because someone inconvenienced you.
Has any other death or family shooting ever impact you on that level? Have you ever suffered any loss of life related to the hip hop scene?
I mean, personally, definitely, you know, there's people who have passed, you know, through gun violence, you know, but I mean, we've like just being around the industry, you know, like I say in Doe B, you know, seeing that incident, the Nipsey incident, you know, being in LA when Nipsey passed, and, you know, going down to South LA to the Marathon shop after he passed, and just seeing like how the loss of life can impact communities. It's just, you know, it's just touching. And just like, you know, at some point we just have to have a wake up call, like, look, this is not the way to go. And yeah, it's just, you know, a lot of this stuff is just senseless too. It can be avoided. Like a lot of this stuff doesn't really have to happen. With any of these deaths, whether it's Takeoff or Nipsey or Trouble, like any of these deaths didn't necessarily have to happen. Yeah.
And a part of that, the Migos already had their rough patches in terms of Quavo and Offset.
Yeah.
At one point, we were hoping that they reunite and, like, you know, do some fly stuff, come together. They just lost their, I'll say, brother. and then we find out about the Grammys incident that there was some ruffling in the back. Do you think those two gentlemen will ever kind of squash their beef?
They will. I think right now it's just too much emotions involved. I think right now it's like, it's just,
Do you even know why they're beefing?
Well, I mean, there was some issues with, of course, Offset, he wanted to kind of go on his own as far as like doing his own thing. And I think there was some issues with him and the label prior to this passing. And I think, that's why we saw the Takeoff and Quavo album that they put out together without Offset. So there was already some type of, issues going on with that. And so, and I think, and so Quavo, he puts out a song a couple weeks ago called Greatness, where he basically hints that there is no more Migos. And a lot of people are like, man, like, how can there never be any more Migos? And me as someone who covers hip hop, as a fan of hip hop, I think they will get back together. I think they will mature at some point, and they will. It may not happen today. It may not happen next year. It may not happen in 5 years. But they will come back together because I think what they built is so strong. Like, you can't name many hip hop groups who have had the run that Migos have had from 2011 until now. Like, there's not, I mean, I know New York people are going to get upset when I say this, but you can put them on the level of Run DMC. You can put them on the level of Outkast, not as far as musically, but as far as success and continued success over a decade. So they're going to go down, the Migos are going to go down as one of the best hip hop groups in history. You got to put them up there with the Run DMCs and the Outcasts and the Public Enemies and the EPMDs. Like, just think about this generation. There hasn't been many rap groups that has, in the past decade has duplicated the success of Migos. So I definitely think at some point, Quavo, Offset, they're going to come together. They're going to figure it out. Like I say, it may not happen right now. It may not happen this year. But at some point, they're going to mature as men, and they're going to understand like what Migos represented and how much they impacted the world. And, they're going to have to kind of figure out like, how can they, put that success, put that out there again for the people, because the people want to see it.
Definitely. When you just spoke, you mentioned Run DMC.
Yeah.
And I instantly thought about Jam Master Jay.
Yeah.
Another person killed, connected to our music. The hip hop scene, has been one that has rewarded, but it also has taken. Trap music, it does glorify the criminal elements that comes with the street life. So I just wonder, from your vantage point, being someone that has wrote a book about it, has been a part of you're a part of our culture, has studied it, is your stance that you maybe want to hope that one day see the music change in terms of rhythm, in terms of vibration? And what can we do at this point? Because I do feel like it's killing us if we're talking about shooting each other, and that's some fly, catchy line, some cool lyrics. It's getting us locked up now. So how do we, from your vantage point, how do we combat against that? And I put this on the table. I thought maybe if we highlight music that doesn't focus on that type of energy and reward the guys that are talking about real stuff. I think like a Lupe Fiasco, he was from Chicago streets. Yeah. Kanye is from Chicago. There's a way to tell these stories without glorifying it. I just love to get like a closing thoughts or statements on that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I never want to edit an artist. I want an artist to always be true to who they are, and I want them to kind of put out what they feel is true to themselves. I think we should be able to offer a variety of music. I don't think hip hop should be one way. I don't think that there just should be boom bap. I don't think there should just be trap. Right. I think there should be, there should be a Mos Def. There should be a, there should be a Gucci Mane. There should be a Yo Gotti. We should be all of that because they represent the black community. Yeah. That's what the black community is. You got people who are in the streets. You got people who going to college. You know what I'm saying? You got people who are just working a regular 9 to 5. Like, our culture is just so, vast that one story shouldn't dominate the market. But we seeing it is happening in this way because the consumer, black pain is profitable. And anytime you can put out black pain, you know, the consumers will pay for it. Consumers who don't even come from our environments will pay for Black pain to be disseminated. And so hopefully there's something where the artist will wise up and understand that it is a game, that it's not reality, that it's just something that that you're being used as a pawn, that you're being used to the detriment of your community, to put out negativity. So I just hope, you know, you just want the youngsters to be able to offer something else, because there's always going to be new artists who tell the story of hip hop. Hip hop is 50 years old. This is the 50th anniversary of hip hop. And just think of the stories that have come from hip hop from 1973 to 2023. So many stories, so many powerful voices. There was a time when, you know, it was all about breakdancing, getting the party jumping. And then, you know, it was like,
so what caused the shift? You said the consumer, or was it the corporations that kind of, it's the same thing like, you know, watching us on TV kill each other or violent scenes. It fits certain stereotypes, and the consumers that don't look like us, who has majority of the money, are paying for that. And we're falling right into that trap. Yeah,
it is So it's almost like a literal trap where you get trapped by this environment that is created for you. And so you have to.
That's what I said. Do we reward the artists do we at least control that and say, we want to push this guy to the forefront, this young lady to the forefront? Is that how we can combat?
Well, it's up to, at the end of the day, man, it's up to, like, it's numbers, right? Like, how do you create movements? How do you create these movements where you're speaking of certain ways that's outside of the box? You look at someone like Toby. Toby, like, he's rapping about his family. Like, he's spitting hard, like, you know, dope visuals, dropping dope visuals every week. You know, he's next to his wife, his kids, and that's you know, a dude who is basically rapping, sitting next to his wife, his pregnant wife, and all his kids. Like, to me, that's growth. You know what I'm saying? And the fact that we even have an example of a Toby who can talk about fatherhood, who can talk about being a responsible husband, and you know what I'm saying, like, and still be dope. Like he makes dope music. So, you know, it's really about having the choices of, you know, we should be able to have trap music. We should be able to have, you know, someone like a Toby to give us something else,
some balance,
to provide that balance. And so, and someone like a Toby his you know, we've lifted. I think his fan base has grown to the point where it's like, you know, him coming from being an independent artist, people like the fan is just like, yo, this is the guy. And so, if you can get behind those people who are talking the messages that you want to hear, I think we should continue to do that. And I think it'll resonate. And I think people will see those examples and say, okay, maybe I don't have to be a dope man. Maybe I could just be a dope ass father. You know what I'm saying? Like, I could be a dope, you know, a dope family man who just give back to his community instead of taking away. And so for me, that's my hope, is to really, like, you know, when I wrote this book about trap, I didn't really, you know, and we talked about it, it wasn't really just about the music. It was about the environment as well. In the environment that created trap music before the music even started. And so if we can understand that these environments were created before we even got here, redlining through the federal government, where you can't even buy a house in certain neighborhoods, where you got the, you know, the crime bill in 1994, where 3 strikes you out. You got crack cocaine basically dropped into our communities. And so all of this stuff is a storm that was created that has nothing to do with the Black community, that was pretty much, you know, we've been victimized as Black people since we got here, from a federal standpoint, from a local standpoint, and the music is just indicative of what we've experienced.
Right. So if we were experiencing better, we would rap about that.
We would rap about what's better in
what's
a
happening,
sense.
like what's happening in our life,
in our lives. But I just wanted to show that you know, some of the negative portrayals come from negative circumstances that, you know, that's been placed within our communities, where we, you know, it's just so deep as far as the things that have been perpetuated on Black people for decades, and how we're still in the midst of this trap, this environmental trap, this societal trap. And so it's just deeper in the music.
Like, what is A.R. Shaw riding around listening to? Who pumping you up? I mean, I listen to everybody. I listen to the trap music, but I also listen to some slower paced things. But who is AR like riding to? And then my last question: who do you see is the king of trap music?
Okay, so who I'm riding around to, you understand, I'm very diverse when it comes to music. One day I'm gonna listen to Outkast. Another day I might want to listen to Gucci Mane. The other day I might listen to Lupe. I might listen to Miles Davis. I might listen to John Coltrane. I like the new Lil Yachty joint where he's like doing like I don't know if it's neo soul or rock, but it's some type of fusion that Lil Yachty is doing. Like but it's a cool, dope album. I'm gonna listen to Migos. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm gonna listen to all types of black music from different genres. Like I'm just a music lover, so I don't really necessarily just hone into one thing, but I listen to pretty much everything. I'm gonna ride around a little baby. You know what I'm saying? Like I listen to anything that you can like think of, because I think black music, it tells our story, right? In different ways. And so I like to hear different aspects of the black experience, and you can get the different aspects of the black experience through music.
Yeah. So who would be your guy or girl that's like, that you say, I'm gonna put the crown on them right now? Who's holding down the trap?
Oh, it's Lil Baby. Lil
Yeah.
Baby's the king, man. Lil Baby got it. Like Lil Baby is like, you know, kid from Oakland City, pretty much the same neighborhood I came from, a lot younger, but
Yep.
he's the guy. Lil Baby is the guy who's pretty much taking that mantle. He has the crown right now. And yeah, he's like taking it to that next level. And it's somebody that you can't deny.
Yeah, and he seems kind of like he stays out of trouble. It seems I haven't seen him caught up in none of this RICO stuff.
Yeah. Lil Baby is, he's been pretty much, focused, and it's good that, Coach and P, they've been good at, like, for the most part, like, guiding their artists, making sure that they on the right track. And so, we've seen Lil Baby. He's not in trouble. You don't see him like in the news headlines. For the most part, he's giving back to the community.
Right.
I covered a few months back. He did this thing where he gave back a bunch of toys and bikes and school supplies to kids for back to school. So he's doing the right things, right? And so, in a sense, he's a good example. You know what I'm saying? Some of his lyrics can be questionable at times, but at the same time, him as a person, people can say, "Oh man, Lil Baby is coming back
like
to
he
the
balances it.
He balances
the
it.
vibration.
Yeah, and he's an approachable dude. He doesn't. You don't necessarily, when you see Lil Baby, you don't necessarily say, "Okay, this is the biggest gangster in the neighborhood." You say, "Oh, this is the dude who comes from the street and he's telling his story." So yeah, we commend Lil Baby, man. I think he's the dude who has the crown when it comes to trap music right now, and I think he's gonna be hot for at least the next 5 to 10 years.
Cool. Well, Mr. A.R. Shaw, we thank you for coming by for your first one-on-one with Hype Plus. This has been a great learning experience and learning more about how trap history came to be and where it's going. So thank you.
Definitely, man. Thanks for having me, bro.